CDI. This next session, we're going to speak about what you need to know about ESG risks and opportunities. In New York terms, we call it "What's in it for me?" But your customers are being driven by their values, or in other words, ESG. As a reseller engaged in ESG, your practices have some risks and have rewards. I mean, risks, your reputation risks, your regulatory risks, supply chain risks, but there are rewards there too, market opportunities, there's enhanced access to capital and so much more. I'm honored today to have Richard Kenny from Tech Buyers here. Richard's title is the Sustainability and Research Director. But Rich, I'm going to bestow upon you a new title. I'm going to call you the Doctor of ITAD because I mean, your education, your knowledge of ITAD is superb. It's unmatched in the industry. And we have Reich Sandlin here from River Vista Partners. We spoke a little bit earlier today about there being consultants for ITADs and who are companies already are ITADs, consultants for companies who are looking to become ITADs. And Reich's company, River Vista, is one of the best. No, they are the best in the industry. So, Reich, we're really honored to have you here today too. And I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I hope you're enjoying it so far. It's been excellent from my side. So Reich and I are going to talk to you a little bit about understanding lifestyle thinking. So the introduction is going to start around understanding carbon, understanding materials, understanding net zero strategies, because I'm aware for some of you, the concept of ESG and the specifics might not be clearly defined within your own heads. So we're going to start by understanding what it is, why it matters. Reich's going to go through a little bit on classic what's in it for me. So why does this matter? Why do your customers care? What we want to do. And then I'll kind of close up a little bit around how you can demonstrate that compliance and how you can turn those conversations into a great opportunity, basically. So I'm going to open up our slide deck now and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, Rich, while you're doing that, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself a bit. I used to own and operate an ITAD company and sold that a few years ago. And so now I consult and help other companies that are in remarketing and trade or in ITAD security and reuse processing or in the e-scrap industry. Really determine, implement best practices, go-to-market strategies, sustainability and ESG programs. I've been fractional leader of various roles in these organizations. I do some CEO coaching and I help with mergers and acquisitions, both on the buy side and the sell side. So I'm applying my operational perspective, coming from the same seats that you all are, to these new growth areas and helping you understand how to implement them. That's my background.
Christoph, can you see this slide deck okay? Is this showing up?
Yes,
all right?
I can.
It's kind of hammered my entire screen, so I've lost everything. So that's the introductory piece. That's who we are, and Joe's done the introduction. So slide one, making sure you can see this okay. You're seeing understanding carbon, yeah?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, like I said, I'm all blocked out. So when we talk about ESG, there's three key aspects of this. We're talking environmental, social, and governance. And we're going to cover two key aspects of that we serve particularly well within the ITAD industry, which is the environmental aspects and the governance aspects. If you're going to use ITAD as a driver into higher level conversations at the business, if you're going to do more business, the coming years, it's crucial that you understand what we're talking about when we talk about ESG, because it's a language that the decision makers in the businesses you're going to be working with are going to be speaking. So you need to find common language with them, and that's kind of what this first bit of this talk is all about, really. It's about understanding carbon. So when we talk about carbon, we talk about everything that is classed as a greenhouse gas. So this is what's called carbon equivalent, or CO2e. That is, what is the commonality between all these different gases, and how do we turn them into a standard reporting metric, which is carbon. So what we've got on this slide here is carbon, methane, NO, sulfur hexafluoride, all that sort of stuff, and what its carbon intensity is around that. So carbon has a 1-to-1 relationship, lives in the atmosphere for about 100 years, so its impact is 1. At the other end, you've got methane, which although has a much shorter atmospheric lifetime, it has 25 times more warming impact. This is really important because these intensities and life cycles are how we then turn them into a common language, which is carbon. So aspects of IT will contain various parts of this equipment in its creation and in its destruction. The bit that really matters to us at ITAD is our 3 core scopes of carbon: scope 1, direct; scope 2, indirect; and scope 3, which is fundamentally everything, and which is the supply chain. So direct carbon is realistically company vehicles. So this is the sort of mileage and the basic facilities. Scope 2 is, for most companies, purchased energy. There's a major part in the European Union where you must report on scope 1, scope 2 carbon, and scope 3 is elective, but becoming more and more required as time goes on. And by next year, we'll probably find that most major institutions and large businesses must provide scope 3. And this is what you directly feed into. So scope 1 and 2, very much about their sort of carbon use. Scope 3, very much about the aspects that we're dealing with, which is the IT equipment, what it's taken to create it, what transport costs tie into it. And this is where you can help a business. You can help with their scope 3 reduction and their circularity initiatives by doing this. So the main categories for us from the 15 scope 3 categories are 1 and 12. If you want to look more into this, look into it. There's a link below on scope 1-3 emissions through the greenhouse gas protocol, and that's kind of the current legislation around that. This common language of carbon leads us to strategy, and that strategy for most business is going to be doing something about it or moving to net zero. So you might have heard of a lot of large organizations pushing things like net zero pledges. That net zero pledge isn't just about offsetting, which is what's traditionally been done. It's about finding what your residual emissions are and dealing with those. It's about reduction to as close to zero as possible. And then it's about moving towards carbon capture and investing in actual carbon capture technologies as well. So part of this is around measurement. Part of this is around understanding, part of this is around education, and then it's about strategy. And this is where ITAD fits in. ITAD fits into net zero strategies because you're reducing long-term scope 3 impact for a business by encouraging product life extension. So when people are buying refurbished or reused assets, their scope 3 cost, their carbon cost, is close to zero compared to brand new because it's already been paid for at first use. So anyone that's building a net zero plan, circularity is going to be part of that. Circular economy is going to be a big part of that. And you facilitate that for them. You're encouraging their assets going back into the circular economy, and they're potentially then buying or reselling remanufactured or refurbished goods. So this is a key part of top level strategy that you fit into beautifully as an ITAD. And it's important that you get an understanding of what levers you're pulling and helping with this. The other piece to look at is understanding materials and circular economy. So within reporting, most of the knowledge and information that people are looking for is around carbon, scope 1, 2, scope 3. As that becomes more mature, and that'll come over time, we need to understand the critical raw materials in the assets as well, and how we articulate the savings we make for a customer by not going straight to recycling, but increasing the circularity of an aspect and a piece of equipment. Isn't just the carbon piece, it's materials, it's a social impact, it's a human cost of creating an asset. So when we create a server, it has roughly 1.6 tons of carbon in the creation of a server, but it also has 23 of the world's 30 most critical raw materials. And these materials like gold, tantalum, neodymium, cobalt, zinc. These are things that are in political short supply and have an inherent security risk for a country to not have control over their supply chain around them. So every time these are used and then disposed of, it has a significant impact on both our national security and our environmental impacts as a world. And IT is a really high user of these CRMs, critical raw materials. So governments are aware of this, and they're trying to build in legislation that incentivizes reuse of assets. So it's understanding that we're not just solving a carbon issue, we're solving a materiality issue as well. We're solving a piece around the critical raw materials that are in the equipment that we're reusing. There's also things around, water usage, heat usage, waste, all this sort of stuff. By reusing, we get to solve a lot of problems. The other piece is circular economy. And we use the word circularity and circular economy, but if you're unsure, circular economy is understanding how we extend a product life past its first use. So there's a waste hierarchy where reuse is at the top, remanufacturing and refurbishment is second to that, and then below that is recycling, and then right at the very bottom would be just complete waste for heat regeneration, basically. And what we're trying to do is move stuff up that circular economy towards the top of that pyramid, top of that hierarchy. And we're doing that by effective IT asset disposition, taking goods, decommissioning them, getting them refurbished, remanufactured, and back onto the market. And the impact of that is a significant net positive environmentally and financially as well. Just before I hand over to Reich, I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding energy and its role in this as well. So what we're showing you now is a report from a piece of software we built that looks at the annualized IT energy of a data center and the key metrics that they're particularly interested in. So for the data center, they're particularly interested in power usage effectiveness. But what is becoming more and more important for them is understanding utilization, understanding scope 2 carbon, understanding annualized scope 3. The next stage is materials, and a lot more work needs to be done on that, but that's where we're looking for. Right now, this reporting is hard to get hold of and difficult to prove. As time goes on, it will become mandatory, and this will be something you need to be thinking about, is how do you demonstrate the impact of what you're doing for a business from a supply chain and from a whole value proposition piece. So Reich's going to talk a little bit about that before I talk about demonstrating compliance. And he's going to be talking to you about articulating customer value. So I'll pass to you if that's okay, Reich.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. The bottom line, what's in it for me, right? And Rich, you really described well that ITAD organizations have a unique opportunity to impact their clients or their upstream partners, ESG programs, right? So, scope 3 is certainly a key part of that. What are we doing to help with their emissions? But then there's governance aspects, there's social impacts that ITADs can have. But you know what? We can't just productize it. We can't just say, flip a switch and say, hey, I've got some ESG now. Come buy some ESG from me. It's in this sack right here. It's great. That's not what we're doing, right? We can, and many ITAD organizations provide some environmental benefits reporting. They identify the quantity of different types of equipment that went to reuse and the quantity that went to recycling or end of life. And there are calculators out there where you can identify the kilowatt hours saved, the greenhouse gas emissions that were saved or avoided by extending the life of this equipment or recovering those materials. Hazardous waste and landfill avoidance. It's really about avoidance. All right. It's not that you, the ITAD, is actually generating these environmental benefits directly. It's that because of what you do, you're helping society as a whole avoid manufacturing new equipment, mining materials, and all the negative environmental effects of those things. Thus, it's an environmental benefit to do these things. So, but because those calculators are readily available, some of them are a bit dated, but they're still good at providing rough data. It's easy. This part of it's easy. How much equipment you reuse. How much equipment you recycle. But it has very little to do with your own operations. Right. So Rich mentioned what is being emitted by your own trucks or by your own facility as you do that. And so to be credible, to really be able to talk about ESG with your clients who care about this, then you need to take it a little further. So let's move to the next slide. So when we talk about ESG and being able to have that conversation with the client, you really have to document circularity, what's going on with the equipment. You may not know all the details, of the downstream activities, but you have an understanding of it. You have a handle on it. You understand emissions, not just what we just talked about in terms of environmental benefits and avoidance, but actually what's going on in your facility. That doesn't mean that you are putting a meter on your tailpipes of your trucks, right? There are ways to calculate that based on mileage and fuel usage and that sort of thing. So you also want to build community programs. This is not something that can be done overnight. It's something that takes time to do. You want to build impactful partnerships. Partnering with other organizations of like mind that can produce environmental or social benefits. Strong governance. When we think about governance in ITAD, well, a lot of you are certified. We just heard a session an hour ago on certifications, and certifications is a third party evaluation of your governance, of some of your governance processes. So certification is not something that you flip a switch and you've got it either. It's something that takes time to implement. So when we think about ITAD, sustainability and ESG are not just they don't just happen because of what you do. You could actually make them the service itself. And I coined a phrase here, sustainability as a service. I'm not the first person to use that term, but I may be the first in this industry. But it's this idea that the value you're providing your clients is environmental, social, and governance impacts for their business. And so how do you think of that as integrated with your services? Some companies in this industry have actually started having two different contracts. They have their normal ITAD contract, and then they might have their ESG contract, right? That kind of talks about it differently. Different value proposition in that, because the reporting is more sophisticated and more benefits from that. So it's really kind of interesting seeing how the industry is moving towards sustainability as a service and building ESG into their service portfolio. The ESG journey, we talk about this. It's not just the start. It's not just the end point. It's the journey, because it takes time, and you don't want to wait till you get 3 years down the road to start talking about it. So you really want to have be able to articulate your ESG journey and make it a competitive differentiator, right? It's something that you can be proud of if you can do it credibly. I call it storytelling with credibility. You're not just greenwashing. You're not just talking about, ESG as, hey, isn't this great that we're doing these good environmental things? It's good to feel good. It's good to talk about and report on positive environmental impacts, but you've got to make sure that those are well grounded. And some of the things that Rich talked about earlier, really understanding carbon, really understanding sources of that, understanding energy and how those things play into the impact for the client are important, and being able to trace that back with credibility. And I think, Rich, you're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the standards, reporting standards, and how that can be handled. But let's move to the next slide. Great. So why do we care, right? There are certain drivers, regulatory, public and private investors that we see in the marketplace are driving your clients to pursue this and push these requirements into their supply chain. Many of these smaller entrepreneur-led ITAD organizations, they may not have much in the way of regulatory or investor pressure, but their clients care. The clients are caring more and more. And the clients have corporate commitments where they may have a goal around their scope 3, emissions reductions, or they might have a goal around donations and how they impact the community with equipment. So you're going to help them do that with with the services that you provide. Let me emphasize, though, you've got to be aligned with the clients. You're dealing with waste and waste diversion. You're dealing with circularity, emissions, social impacts, ethics, like the ASCDI ethics program, data security. All of these are great things, but you need to understand where your client's head's at. What are they thinking? What are they prioritizing? And tie your reporting to that in a credible manner. I keep using that word, credible. You really need to make sure that you're accurate, truthful, and understand what you're reporting. You're not just throwing something up on the wall that says, "Hey, isn't this great?" And really, reporting is the deliverable. You're not selling a physical product to the clients. You're providing a service, and what they have to show at the end of the day out of that service you provided is your reporting. So how do you do that in a credible manner? So Rich, that's kind of my perspective on value, and how we generate that for the clients. Tell us how we can do that credibly.
So we've always talked about alignment with standards and frameworks as an ITAD. I was on a panel just before this with Frederick from Blanco talking about data sanitization security. And what has made data sanitization become more mainstream is the ability to validate good practice or best practice in those areas, whether it's NIST, whether it's new IEEE standards around this. We have the same thing for environmental commitment and environmental excellence. We call it walking the talk. So this is understanding how you demonstrate credibility. And, throughout that entire section that Wright was going through there, we're talking about you must credibly deliver this. You must deliver to the customer in a way that they understand, they can validate, and they can trust. Because that is your market differentiator, has been able to solve a problem and provide that. So as a very basic baseline, we talk about things like ISO 14001. This is an environmental management system. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the lowest of low-hanging fruit, and it fits in with what would be a basic requirement for things like R2v3, where you need a 914 and 45,000 ISO. Circular economy ISOs are under development right now. We've got an ISO 57000 family coming into effect at the moment. And at TechBuyer, myself and my chartered environmentalist, we're both working with the Remanufacturing Industry Council in the States to help develop these circular economy frameworks. I advise European Parliament and think tanks, sort of pan-European, to provide confidence on how to do good circular economy practice. And a lot of that's learned through the time we spent as an ITAD and as a refurbisher. This is a very new and emerging concept, circular economy, in mainstream business. Circular economy has always been the way things have been done. It is the traditional method throughout time of reuse and sort of remanufacture. That's how things have always been done. But as we move to a more production-focused economy back in the 1920s, that's kind of got lost a little bit, and it's all been about consumerism and buying new. Circular economy is not a new concept. It's just a new buzzword for saying how we've always handed items down amongst ourselves: repair, reuse, make, do, all those sort of functions. So this is under development at the moment. So how do we align this to current business reporting? How do we align this to current expectations? One of the key ones for me on frameworks, and a big one in the States that you guys will know intimately, with R2 and the most recent version of this, R2v3, where we're talking end-of-life responsibility. Now, some of you will be R2 accredited. I'm sure V3 is quite a bit trickier than the original R2 in my experience, having done this in France, USA, and the UK in the last 8 months. It's a bit trickier. It's a bit harder. There's a bit more work to be done around it, specifically around sanitization of assets. But it's a clear demonstration that businesses are looking for, especially large businesses in the US, are wanting that end-of-life responsibility to say, once I finish my asset, where does it go? And can you do the due diligence and validation to get to that point? So there's a really clear one. The bottom two is Ecovardis and B Corp. Now, these are what I would call impact assessment tools. So this is how you as a business run. And we're seeing Ecovardis become a bit of a requirement at large enterprise. So I work with a lot of large US businesses, financial institutions, and they're now aligning their supply chain with something they can check quite easily to make sure it's covering ESG. And one of these is this Ecovardis check. And it's an impact assessment you can do. You look through it, and it talks about policies, procedures, outcomes, behaviors. It's fairly low effort. And it might be something that you might want to look at if you're aligning to those large enterprises, because it will get you onto frameworks. And the final one is B Corp. So B Corp is about better business, and it's quite arduous. It's quite hard. It's very well audited. It's relatively expensive for big business, but quite cheap for a small business. So lower turnover, lower staff members. B Corp is really, really good at demonstrating your commitment to social, environmental, and overall governance. You can do the B Corp impact assessment for free to see how you would actually do and score. You don't have to pay to certify. It does take time, but it gives you a really clear view of where your morals and activities are and how they align with business requirements. So B Corp's an interesting one. If you get some time, do have a look at it. You can probably have a go at the impact assessment and see how you'd get on with that and whether or not you'd actually be eligible to become a B Corp. But it's once again, it's a bit like just checking your homework, making sure you're doing things that align with bigger business conversations. And one of my favorite value adds is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that align with how the United Nations and the countries that signed up to this, and there's hundreds of countries that signed up to this, around how we're going to basically align to removing inequality and sustainable futures for all. And what you generally do is you identify goals that align to your operations, choose some targets, state your support, and then report on progress. And it's a really good framework that's really low effort, zero cost practically, and allows you to look at where you're making an impact. And this aligns to how businesses are vetting their supply chain again. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, some of our biggest systems integrators, they align to what's called a 5-star SDG rating through this global goals. And we've done some really good business with some decent sized customers in the UK just by having definable United Nations sustainable goals and demonstrating our performance to that. It's made it, they've gone, one of the businesses we're dealing with, which is one of the biggest systems integrators in the UK, they had 12 ITADs they were working with. They said if you can't align and demonstrate to this, they would, remove you from the chain, and they're down to 6 people now. So they've reduced 6 ITADs just on the back of them not demonstrating these behaviors. So this is stuff that businesses are looking for, and if you can do it and demonstrate it early, it just becomes part of your process, and it will lead to business without a doubt. When we talk about sort of my last thoughts around this, it's this: if you look at what the FTC put out at the end of last year, they are talking about consumers and therefore businesses being conscious of productization and the environmental claims that are being made around this. And I think if you're going to choose to demonstrate your value from an ESG point of view, you need to be as transparent, honest as you can be, because people are going to want current and accurate information about any claims you make. A clear example in the UK was the UK government actually got sued by climate action groups for making unrealistic net zero claims and had to rewrite the entire net zero plan for the United Kingdom because it wasn't robust. So federal bodies in the US are also looking at this, as you can see from the quote here. So my view would be that you need to get ahead of this curve. You need to understand how you're going to articulate this value and then demonstrate compliance to that. So I thought for the last sort of 15-20 minutes of this, I'll stop sharing and we can have a grown-up conversation about this, and hopefully we can lean on the experiences of Rike and myself on how this has worked for us.
Rich, one of the comments you made was around B Corp and the assessment process for B Corp or Ecovardis. I've been through the B Corp assessment a couple of times, and with clients, and they got certified, so that's good. But what we experienced in that was really a good challenge. It made you aware of opportunities to be more impactful, opportunities to implement new policies that are beneficial to your employees and really help you stand out in the labor market, opportunities to do something different from an environmental perspective and your services. Just having to answer those questions honestly, it was quite a challenge. And so, as we think about the certification programs like R2V3 and eStewards and ADISA and so forth, all of those are based on, a continuous improvement management system, ISO 9001, 14001, et cetera. All of those continuous improvement management systems require and provide a framework for you to set goals and to implement those goals. And so, as we think about opportunities as you go through B Corp, what a great place to identify new goals, and think about new ways to impact the environment and society.
Absolutely. We went through B Corp assessment for the main tech buyer business, and then I did it for our subsidiary Interact, and we've got one of the highest B Corp scores ever reported, because we built the business to be an environmentally, socially focused business. But you could build it into your DNA early, and it becomes quite easy to maintain. Otherwise, trying to retrofit your business to a different way of working is quite tricky. So these things are quite good to sense and sanity check how you're performing as a business in these metrics. So I completely agree, Rick. I think it's something that if you look at and spend a bit of time on, it will make you a better business. The key thing is, if it works, how do you demonstrate it and what's the impact? So where have you seen ESG drivers been a requirement or a function in the work you've done around ITAD?
In ITAD, again, from a regulatory perspective, it doesn't, it's not a heavy load on ITADs right now. They're not really looking at small and medium enterprises so much as they are at public companies or really large private companies. In the U.S., the SEC has propagated rules around reporting climate change, disclosing climate change. In California, the state in the U.S., they've put some rules out around not just public companies, but private companies of a certain size also have to do that. And so we're seeing those organizations being, reacting to the legislation and regulation that's coming and pushing that into their supply chain. So we're seeing it in ITAD RFPs from clients. We're seeing that in as some ITADs are leaning into this and leaning forward and implementing services, like I mentioned earlier, that kind of make them stand out. They differentiate themselves in this field. Allows them to to go beyond just the drivers and actually say, hey, we're leading in this field. So I know that TechBuyer is doing that as well. And from a sustainability perspective, you have a holistic look at that. So what sort of things are you doing at TechBuyer to drive or to lead the charge in this?
Yeah, the key thing for us has always been research and intent. So we spend a lot of time on research projects. Part of my role at TechBuyer is to do ground level research, so forensic level analysis of assets, even down to LCAs, lifecycle carbon analysis, energy efficiency and impact. So we're very clear that this is a massive part of our DNA. One thing that's been really interesting for us is we became an Institute of Environmental Management training partner. So we actually provide sustainability training to other enterprises, other businesses. And we make it a mandatory requirement of our people in the business to take and undertake certified environmental training that we then coach on. That impact has been huge. So we've got 300 employees in the UK and US, most of which by the end of next year will have gone through this understanding, whether it's an 8 or 16 or 24-hour course, to understand and educate on the environmental decision making in a business. Where that's been particularly powerful is we've then taken that internal training model to customers as a value add and say, do you want to send a couple of people to a training course that we're going to take at TechBuyer? And the uptake has been pretty much across the board unanimous from all our customers of a decent size, saying, yeah, we want to do this so we can understand how you help us more. And when I say about the sort of people working with, I'm talking like major national banks, large systems integrators, household names are coming to us for this sort of training so they can understand better what the relationship with us brings to them. And like I said, one of the big ones for us was working with Softcat, and Softcat have sent people to us, and now they're looking at training most of their people through us because they feel that we understand this better than perhaps they do. And they're desperate to articulate the good work that they're doing through these sort of initiatives. The one big thing I would say is we're seeing a lot is government tender frameworks are aligning more to refurbishment and remanufacture than I've ever seen before. In the UK, there's a Greening ICT initiative, which means all public sector bodies must have a higher proportion of refurbished equipment in their inventory year on year. So 5% of their assets are refurbished this year. It has to be 6% or higher next year and 7% or higher the year after. So what we've seen is they've released new commercial frameworks, which are, £3 billion frameworks. The requirement is that you must demonstrate sustainability best practice before you can get on the tender. So we've been doing the tendering process for CCS, getting on this sort of stuff. We've had other large systems integrators come to us and say, can we partner with you for ITAD? Because your sustainability credentials make you incredibly attractive for public sector procurement.
That's great.
And that's the piece, really. You've got these massive businesses that, 13, 14 billion pound businesses saying, can we partner with you just for ITAD? Because we're desperate to lean on those environmental good practices that you constantly instill. So that's a change that I've seen in the last 6 to 8 months that has probably changed the way people think about environmental good practice internally to a business. It's not just demonstrating what you think you can do, it's demonstrating how you are as a business, what your ethics, what your morals are, and how you fit into this. And there is a huge financial opportunity to follow environmental good practice.
Indeed, in the U.S., the federal government has issued a directive to all the agencies of the federal government that they must use a certified company. So there is sort of a baseline there that says you can't even participate in the tender unless you're certified. So that doesn't get you necessarily into the full ESG sustainability world, but it is a strong baseline for reuse and recycling and data security. So which is good. We have a question here. Does one factor weigh heavier on enterprises, environmental or social? My perspective is kind of what I mentioned earlier, which is make sure you're aligned with your enterprises. Different enterprises have different goals and different focus areas for their ESG programs. But it does seem to me that much more of the focus is on environmental. All the buzz about climate change and circularity seems to be a more impactful conversation to have. Rich, what do you think? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because most of your initial corporate social responsibility historically was based around social factors.
Yeah.
Human slavery, anti-bribery, anti-corruption. All these things were mandatory statements that were required to say, we don't take bribes, we don't, underpay workers, we don't. So everything historically around corporate social responsibility, which was, I think, a precursor to ESG, was entirely socially based. But I'm with you, Joe. I see the complete opposite now. Everything's like, what's your environmental credentials? What's your environmental policy statement? How are you helping Scope 2 and Scope 3? What are you reporting on? I rarely get now a social impact question.
Well, we are seeing some are more around governance related to social, diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental equity. Some of these kind of concepts are becoming more important in the request for proposals and so forth. But again, most of the emphasis does seem to be on climate change and environmental impacts.
Yeah, I think the D&I is a really good point. D&I is diversity and inclusion. The D&I aspects, we're seeing a heck of a lot more driven from the tech sector than I've ever seen before. Construction, we've seen a lot more environmental. So when we deal with the environment, when we deal with the construction center, it's very much about initiatives, carbon capture, modular buildings and stuff like that, reuse. When it's the tech sector, I think because so little of it's material and it's more about the technology and code, they lean heavier into another sector, which I think is, the D&I sector. We see a lot about women in tech. We see an awful lot about sort of representation. And I know America has some quite specific sort of aspects around that on tendering, right? In regards to like diversity and inclusion, in regards to like women-owned boards and
it's certainly a question that's frequently asked. I'm not sure that certainly not every client would say, hey, you've got to have 10% of this or 5%. It doesn't get to that level, but they do want you as a supplier to have a good handle on that, right? Be able to know, all right, 5% are women and in management roles. And so, that those sort of statistics are really important, and being able to back those statistics up credibly is a key part of responding to opportunities.
So I've just got another question coming. So how do you engage lock in an enterprise to understand their responsibilities in ESG? So what it says, they talk to customers and then they go out and do business with the highest bidder. That's really common. It's one thing we see an awful lot is that people have a very clear want around you must have the following ESG credentials and yada yada yada, and then it's still a race to the bottom on price, or who'll pay more. Are you seeing the weighting of those sort of RFQs shift at all, or have you seen that shift in the last 18 months where it isn't just 3 equal proposals, go with the lowest? Have you ever seen someone win business purely on the back of their credentials in this area?
Well, it's never purely on that. Money matters, but yes, certainly a shift. I would say longer than that. Gartner over the past probably 10 years or longer has been telling and advising enterprises that they need to budget for ITAD, that they should not expect to get money back, that they need to budget for proper disposal and proper movement into the ITAD space. When I coach ITAD companies on their go-to-market strategy, right? When we talk about, all right, how do we approach an enterprise? How do we target and talk and have the conversation with organizations? Every single time it's about education, because you're not really sure where your contact in the organization is in terms of their understanding of ESG or even data security. Some of them are still saying, hey, I just want the highest price. Well, if you as an ITAD have implemented all these best practices and gotten certified and have this great reporting, that costs money. And so you're not necessarily going to provide the absolutely the highest dollar, but you're providing value in many other ways. And so it's important for the sales team or as they develop the business and develop the relationships with clients to be able to educate the client. So for years, we've talked about the risks associated with data security and privacy and the importance of using a certified company to handle your equipment. Now we're shifting that conversation to include, environmental, social, and governance impacts and trying to draw additional stakeholders from the enterprise. It's not just the IT guy, or it's not just the facilities guy that's responsible for the equipment. Moving the equipment, let's bring in some other stakeholders from sustainability, from finance, from other parts of the organization to make sure that you're making the best decision for the enterprise, because you have to consider governance, you have to consider security, you have to consider sustainability. If you're not, then that enterprise could be making a poor decision. So, as an ITAD player, being able to educate your clients and bring that additional value to them, I think is a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think so. And we've actually seen some business won on the back entirely of environmental credentials, as opposed to, and that's probably a European thing because there's a little bit more emphasis in this side. What I would say, there's an interesting quote from Gartner. I looked at it last week from their most recent sort of Gartner predicts 2023 report, and the quote says by 2026 30% of organizations will implement environmental sustainability programs for IT that incorporate parallel objectives of driving cost optimization and minimizing waste. And that's what Gartner released, I think, like in February this year, and that aligns exactly with the conversation we're talking about here. The future of IT optimization is concurrent strands of reducing and minimizing environmental impact, waste, emissions, while looking for cost optimization. And I think that's something that, as an ITAD, you get to be one of the real heroes of the story. If you get this right, you get to drive a cost benefit for following an environmental behavior. And that's really, really crucial, because most environmental strategies and most environmental plans involve an element of cost. They involve an element of sacrifice for the organization. As an ITAD, you're a traditional win-win here. And historically, it's always been like, decommission your kit, get some money for it. The fact that you can align to ESG objectives while still, saving money, optimizing cost, minimizing waste, means you're really well suited if you can articulate that of how they can make a no-lose decision, get some money, or extend their kit and hit environmental objectives. You just need to provide that element of it. We've got another question that says, how does an ITAD ensure transparency and accountability in its social impact initiatives?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's good to get back to social for a moment, because that just really receives so little of the attentions. When we talk about ESG, sometimes, it's great to be able to say, hey, we donated 2,000 laptops to schools or something like that. Okay, so that's good that you can quantify how many you donated, and that you actually did donate. That's good, but what's the impact of that? And so what I've seen in kind of the donation space, or in community involvement space, is how many lives have you impacted? How many people were impacted by the action you took? For example, there's an organization called Medic Mobile, and they provide cell phones and mobile devices to healthcare workers in other countries like Africa, and other Kenya and so forth. And for every device that is donated to that effort, they're able to substantiate that 500 people received healthcare that would not have otherwise received healthcare because of the mobile app that they were able to deploy. What a wonderful way to quantify your impact. And so for every device, if you think about 500 people a year that are receiving healthcare, all right, if you donated 100 devices or 1,000 devices, that just exponentially changes your impact. And that's exciting. So look for partners. My advice is look for partners that can provide that impact related reporting and substantiate it. Back to the credibility conversation, right? Can they do it credibly? Can you talk about it credibly? What are you seeing?
Almost exactly the same. The key is that people now are craving that transparency and craving that accountability and that credibility. I like I said, most of my customers around the Interact piece are financial sector, and everything is about auditability, traceability, accountability. But the decisions have been driven by those wider social environmental factors. They just want proof that you're doing it right. And that leads back to the standards and exactly what we talked about previously. The social impact is so massively overlooked that it's criminal, to be honest. But like I said, find good partners. There's another one called IT Schools Africa, if you're aware of that. They take a lot of equipment that doesn't have much resale value for ITAD. So if you're looking for a partner and you want to do something impactful, IT Schools Africa take a lot of peripherals. So, laptops, monitors, mice, things like that traditionally ITADs see as a bit of a problem. And they repurpose, they send them over to Africa, to Ghana and Rwanda to be repurposed. And they focus on high value skills acquisition. So teaching to refurbish in country. So they're talking about, providing this equipment and then teaching people to refurbish it and bring it back into the communities that they're serving. So I think that has a really nice impact. And I love IT Schools Africa. I think they do some incredible work around that because they're focused on social value. They're focused on, yes, decreasing environmental waste, but at the same time, increasing skills, ability and capabilities to earn, which I think is a huge social driver.
Yeah, I just learned something and made a note of that to look into it.
So last couple of minutes, we've got one more question is can you share any challenges or obstacles as an ITAD has encountered while implementing ESG initiatives?
You have to be patient and diligent. As I mentioned earlier, it's not something you flip a switch and suddenly have ESG. You really have to think about this. The partnerships conversation with Medic Mobile or with IT Scores in Africa, that those relationships, those partnerships don't happen overnight. They take some time and development to make that happen. If you're looking at environmental or carbon offsets, well, you don't want to just buy the cheapest offset because that's not credible. Let's make sure that it's got the credentials associated with it, with Gold Standard or Vera or one of these other platforms that ensure that the carbon offset is legitimate. So it takes time to really think through that. And kind of what I mentioned earlier is that it's a journey. You don't have a journey unless you take the first step. And so helping an ITAD organization take that first step and start to plan, start to build that roadmap or strategy for ESG is kind of that first initial commitment that the entrepreneur or the leader of the organization needs to make that commitment and say, hey, we are going to do this as an organization. So sometimes that's the first hurdle that has to happen.
Yeah, exactly the same from my end. It's a commitment issue. It's obstacles is transparency from the other areas of your supply chain. Like I said, you think you're doing the right things. Sometimes it turns out you're not, but it was all best intentions. So yeah, the commitment to education, the commitment to effort. Yeah, I think that's a big thing. But I think the value is clear, and the want is clear, and the needs are there. And I think if you're looking to develop the business and the industry of ITAD, this is the battleground to fight it on, I think, going forward.
What do you think, Joe? Do you want to buy a bag of ESG?
Well, I started to think about back in they used to have rental credit where you could buy tax credits. I was wondering if they maybe could bundle ESG like you would tax credits and buy and sell and trade them. Where do I buy a bag? But I'll tell you something. TechBuyer is a wonderful company because they walk the walk, they talk the talk. You mentioned the African initiative. I think you guys were very much involved with. You also involved with the Bridging Tech. I think it's a California-based nonprofit that gets laptops to kids in needy schools. So I mean, you guys, you're an example of what a company looking for ESG should be doing. You do it yourself.
Yeah, and I know that you got involved as well with that, Joe, for the IT Schools Africa, and it was incredibly successful. Then there was a lot of lives impacted by the good work that you've done at the ASCDI about that as well. So good partnerships, right?
Well, look, we're all part of a community. I mean, and the world's our community. If we got to lift everybody up, or we're all going to fall down. So I totally believe that.
Completely agree.
Closing comments. We have just about a minute to go, and then we're going to take a 1-minute break, and then be on with our second to last session.
I am incredibly excited about the ITAD industry and the impact that we can have to help enterprises, help organizations, help governments implement best practices around environmental, social, and governance. We can have impacts, and that's exciting to me. And it's also exciting to me to see so many organizations step up and say, yes, we want to do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. I will say one more PS. You mentioned about how they're Rich. I think you mentioned that in the UK, X percentage of product being purchased is mandated to be secondary market use product. The U.S. In the U.S. government, the government bids on products using the GSA, the General Services Administration, and for many years they had a used list and a new list for products in the GSA. But over the last few years, the used list has been they've gotten rid of it. Manufacturers have said, don't let them sell used stuff because there's counterfeit issues, there's security issues. But I'm glad to see that this movement towards ESG is maybe going to revive that. It's going to say, Reich, as you said, if a company's certified, it's okay to buy from them, to let them provide the services. So I think that we might see that being regenerated again, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think you're exactly right. The right standards and assurances should hopefully help that market grow even bigger.
Folks, we're going to disappear for 60 seconds. We'll be back with Claire from TCO. Excuse me. Guys, thank you very much. Thanks for the education today. I learned a lot, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Ryder.